This is probably going to be a part one and part two with this chapter. It's rather long, and I don't feel well, so we'll see how far we get with it. But this is chapter one of the book by Solomon Zeitlin, The Dead Sea Scrolls and Modern Scholarship. The war between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. And I guess I'll mention this as well. I'm reading this off Internet Archives, so I'm reading it off my phone while recording this, so it's not the most fun way to read, but here we go. In 1948, the late Professor E. Soltnik published fragments of a scroll which he called The War Between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. This scroll, with two others, was bought from a merchant who said he had obtained it from a Bedouin who had found it in a cave near the Dead Sea. He said that the scroll was of pre-Hasmonean period. In an article published in the JQR, or Jewish Quarterly Review, of 1950, I expressed doubt about the antiquity of this scroll. In December of 1954, the scroll, with two others, was published by Mossad Balik, and the publication aroused great sanctification in Jerusalem. Long dispatches had been previously sent out from London about its importance because of its antiquity. A telegram by INS, I'm not sure what that stands for, had been published in the Philadelphia Inquirer, October 3rd, 1954, about it. No doubt, accounts appeared in other newspapers of this country. On December 27th, 1954, another dispatch was published in various newspapers, and the scroll again was described as one of the oldest of three which had been placed in a cave at the time of the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans in the year 70 CE. I might just say 80 when I see that kind of stupidity, just because it irritates me. Because I feel stupider having had to subject myself to that kind of stupidity. It bothers me. But anyway, I'll be saying AD and BC. He says CE and BCE because he's a retard. But we'll continue on. The scroll was said to have a connection with the sect of the Essenes. The dispatch to the Philadelphia Inquirer said that one school of thought held that the wars described there referred to a real struggle between the Jews and the Romans, whereas other scholars were of the opinion that it apocalyptically referred to future wars and the second coming. The scroll was well advertised. It was assumed that the scroll was very important for the study of history and the Second Commonwealth. Now that the scroll has been published and a photostat of the text has been supplied, I believe that my critical and minute analysis we shall be able to determine whether it was written during the Second Commonwealth and has an important value for history, or whether it was composed in the Middle Ages by some obscure and unlettered Jew. In examining the scroll, one should not seek to judge its age by seeking parallels to it. Parallels may be found in any ancient writings, regardless of when the author lived. He read books, and because he was a Jew, he was familiar with the Bible and other writings, or he knew of the contents of some book or of some books by hearsay. Hence, he was influenced by them and could have used parallel ideas and expressions which had been in voyage in the past. First and foremost, to determine the period when a document was written, he must ascertain when some of the ideas, expressions, and terminology used in it originated, and became current. Scholars agree that some of the Midrashic literature is of a late period because it contains Arabic words and expressions from the Byzantine period. In spite of the titles appended to this literature, which purport to give it great antiquity, the scroll is ascribed by some to the pre Hellenistic period and by others to the time when the Zealots fought against the Romans. But it happens that it contains words, expressions, and halakha, which are of a very late period. It therefore is not of the period of the Second Commonwealth, but of the Middle Ages, and we shall set forth unimpeachable proofs for this view. On plate 24, the author says that the priests who participated in the wars by blowing the trumpet should not go near the slain so as not to defile the oil used in the anointments of their priesthood. But during the Second Commonwealth, the priests were not anointed with oil at all. There is no mention in the Tanaitic literature, Josephus, and the books of the Maccabees that the priests were anointed with. Yeah, let's back up. I missed my spot. Josephus in the books of the Maccabees that the priests were anointed with oil. The authors of the Gospels claim that Jesus was the Messiah, i.e., Christ, the anointed, but they never stated that Jesus was anointed with oil. The author of the epistle to the Hebrews, who maintained that Jesus was the Messiah, Christ, and high priest, never said that Jesus was anointed as high priest or as the king. The authors of the Gospels, as well as the author of the epistle to the Hebrews, were aware that no anointment of the high priest or kings took place during the Second Commonwealth. Hence, the phrase in the scroll, he gives a Hebrew words, I'm not even going to try to read them, could not have been written by a man living during the Second Commonwealth. This shows that the author of the scrolls did not live during the Second Commonwealth, for a person writing in that period would have known of these doctrines. Even an unlearned person would have been familiar with well-known doctrines held by his people if he had lived during that period. On the first line of plate 18, 3 Hebrew words were written. And he gives 3 Hebrew words here. I can't read them. He doesn't give a translation a lot of times either when he gives these different languages, different words. He does it with Greek and Hebrew and Latin. He doesn't always give a translation, so there's that, but we'll continue. The parchment on which these words were written was damaged, and hence they were rewritten above the line. These 3 distorted words are enclosed in parentheses. So far as we know, parentheses were not used in antiquity to indicate that certain words should be ignored. If a copyist made an error, he erased what he had written and wrote the correct words in the same place, or in the same space, rather. That was the practice among the Jews. We know from the Talmud that some copyists placed dots either over or under certain words to indicate that they should not be read. Now the question is, who wrote these 3 words above the line? Was it the original author? If so, then we must assume that he lived in a very late period, because it was not the custom in antiquity to enclose words in parentheses. If we assume that a copyist and not the original author enclosed these words in parentheses, then we must ascertain who tampered with the text and especially at what time. Why did the copyist take the scroll out of the cave, put the 3 distorted words in parentheses, write the correct words above the line, and then replace the scroll in the cave? Those who maintain the antiquity of the scroll must explain this enigma. Again, on plate 25, the author wrote the word, and Hebrew word, but left considerable space and then wrote the following word, another Hebrew word, to show that the words were connected. He inserted a connecting dot between the word, Hebrew word, and the word, another Hebrew word. I might just say Hebrew if I ever see it, so you know what I'm going on here. The practice of using connecting lines was not in voyage in antiquity. It is true that in the printed text of the Bible, where we have the ancient signs, one or two syllable words with which do not have an accent sign are connected by a line with the following words to indicate how they should be read. However, in the Pentateuchal scroll, which is read in the synagogue and does not have accent signs, there are no connecting lines. Connecting lines were used in the Bible after accent signs had been introduced, and this was in a comparatively late period. How then can the connecting line in the scroll be explained if it was written during the Second Commonwealth? We must assume, therefore, that it was written during the Middle Ages. If we say that the connecting line was not inserted by the author but by a late copyist, the question again arises: who tampered with the text and when? Why did he take the scroll from the cave and then replace it? The term, we got Hebrew, is used throughout this scroll. The term, Hebrew again, was used in the Second Commonwealth in the biblical books of the post-Restoration period, like Haggai, Zechariah, and Nehemiah. We find only the term, Hebrew. Hence, I maintain that this also indicates that this scroll could not have been written during the Second Commonwealth, as the term was not employed. It has been pointed out that the term, more Hebrew, does not appear in the Book of Chronicles, which was written after the Restoration. It is true that the Book of Chronicles was written after the Restoration. The author, however, refers to the history of the time before the destruction of the First Temple. Hence, he uses the terms which were in voyage throughout that period. Similarly, Josephus, in the first 11 books of his Jewish Antiquities, uses the term Hebrew all through in his time. The term Hebrew was not employed, but Jews, since in his 11 books he refers to the period preceding the destruction of the first temple, when the term Hebrew was employed. He uses the term Hebrew even though in his own time it was no longer in use. The author of the scroll described in the wars of the sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Togar, and Mesa, who were on the other side of the Parat, and he gives a whole bunch of Hebrew here, and also those wars in which they would be engaged with the sons of Arphaxad and with the sons of Ishmael. I'm not sure I'm read that right, but we'll continue. But these peoples no longer existed in the time of the Second Commonwealth. The author copied their names from the Bible, not knowing that these nations had long since passed out of existence. We note that he also mentioned, he gives Hebrew, but he gives a translation here for a change, Togar. In the Pentateuch, we have Togarma. In a latter period, this name was associated with Armenia. In the late rabbinic literature, Togarma referred to Turkey. The name Togar was employed for a Turk and came into voyage in the late Hebrew literature, and never occurred earlier. We cannot explain how the word Togar appeared in this scroll unless we assume that it was composed in a very late period. This assumption is strengthened by the fact that the parentheses as well as connecting lines between two words are used in the scroll. According to the report given in the Dabar April 22nd, 1955, Dr. Yaden maintained that the scroll, the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, was composed during the Roman period between the time of Pompey and the last days of King Herod, in any event before the time of the destruction of the temple. He said that the name Asher referred to the Romans. According to the same report, Professor Mazur questioned him on this point, holding that the name Asher was used to designate the Syrians and not the Romans during the Second Commonwealth. As a matter of fact, the name Asher was never employed for either the Syrians or the Romans. There is no passage in any of the literature and that have come down to us, pagan, pagan Roman or Jewish, which identifies Asher with the Romans. The Romans sometimes were called Kittim, but never Asher. If the author of the scroll really meant the Romans, how could he expect his readers to know that when he uses the term Asher, he refers to the Romans, since none of the writings of that or any other period employed the term Asher to refer to the Romans. Furthermore, how can we explain the names of other peoples like Uz, Hol, Mesa, Togar, the sons of Arphaxad, and the sons of Ketera? There were no nations with these names at the time of the Second Commonwealth, and there were no Jews. All that, I'm not sure I agree with Zeitland on what he's talking about right now, but we'll kind of go along with what he's saying. But I think he's probably wrong about a lot of this. But we'll continue. Who then belongs to tribes? All the people who lived in Judea were called Judeans, Jews. It is related in the Deber that Professor Tur Sinai asked Dr. Yaden about the word, and gives Hebrew, which is found in the scroll. Dr. Yaden explained that this word, Hebrew, is of Persian origin, and that the author of the scroll did not make use of the Targum where the word is used. The problem is, however, how would an author who lived during the Roman period make use of one Persian word which was unknown in Judea? Why is only one word of Persian origin used? No other Persian word appears in the scroll. Judging by other terms and words used in it, we may say that the author did use the Targum, particularly the Targum of Jonathan, which is of late composition. There is, however, more definite proof from the scroll that the author made use of the Targum of Jonathan. On plate 25, he quotes Deuteronomy 22, or chapter 2 through 4, gives Hebrew. The so-called Masoretic text, he doesn't like the Masoretic text, but he's an idiot, so, but yeah, I think later in the book he has a whole thing about, he gives his opinions about the Masoretic text, but he's mistaken on that. But anyway, continue on. The so-called Masoretic text has, and he gives Hebrew, for the Lord your God is he that goes with you. Whereas the scroll has, he gives Hebrew, but he gives translation, for your God goes with you. The rendition of the Pentateuch text, goes with you, occurs only in the Targum of Jonathan, whereas the Septuagint renders it Emon o pro. I'm trying to read it, but I'm gonna just say it's Greek, just to save you the trouble of me trying to pronounce it. That goes with you, and so it is rendered in the Targum according to Onkalios. I guess Hebrew. There are other passages in the scroll which indicate that the author made use of the Targum of Jonathan. These contain terms which are of late period. The author uses the word Hebrew, prepare, reserve. This term appears in the so-called Mechilta and is frequently employed by the Karaites in the Pentateuch. Exodus 24:5. The word is Hebrew, is mentioned. It is related in the Talmud in I think it's Magillum. Let me see if it's an abbreviation, but I don't know the Talmud that well. But Magillum, I think, 9, that when the 70 men rendered the Pentateuch into Greek in the time of Ptolemy the second, they changed the word, this Hebrew word, to another Hebrew word. This change is not recorded in the Septuagint. The author of the scroll has both words. And he gets more Hebrew. Here again, it is indication that the author in some manner was acquainted with rabbinic literature. We can definitely state from the instances given above that this scroll is a very late composition, and we can find no evidence which would support the view that it is of the Second Commonwealth. It has been suggested that the scroll is the work of the Essenes, and one writer even found evidence of this theory because the scroll mentioned a distance of 2,000 cubits from one standard of a camp to that of another, and Josephus is said to refer to such an arrangement among the Essenes in the Judean desert. Josephus never mentions a 2,000 cubit distance in connection with the Essenes. The author of the scroll copied the reference to the distance of 2,000 cubits from the Midrash, and it gives an abbreviation of, I don't know which part of that of Numbers 11, where it is stated that the distance from the standards of the camp should be 2,000 cubits. There is strong evidence that the author of the scroll made use of the Midrash of Numbers, which itself is of the Middle Ages. The author of the scroll said that the names of the angels should be inscribed on the standards Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. The Midrash also mentioned in connection with four standards, the four angels Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. The author of the scroll not only copied the names of these four angels, but in the same order as in the Midrash, Michael first and Raphael fourth. To my mind, this is indisputable proof that the author of the scroll made use of the Midrash of Numbers and the Targum of Jonathan, which are medieval compositions. The word Essenes, or the Hebrew term Hasdim, is not mentioned in the scroll. However, this did not disturb the scholars who maintained that it was a composition by Essenes. We know from Josephus and Philo that this sect was pacifists and opposed war. It is not true that there was a certain segment among them who favored war. Josephus, in listing the different sects and groups who opposed the Romans, did not include the Essenes. It is true that there was one named John the Essene among the army generals. We know that individuals often do not follow party lines or sects to which they belong. We have had fighting Quakers and celebrated generals who belong to the Society of Friends. If there had been a group of Essenes who favored war, Josephus would have so informed us. It is maintained that the story about the war between the so-called Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness is a historical fact. The descriptions on the standards and the insignias are said to bear this out. The war is said to have been a real, not an imaginary one, and therefore the scroll has been regarded as very important not only for the history of the Second Jewish Commonwealth, but also for the history of warfare, as we have shown from internal evidence that the scroll is beyond doubt a composition of the Middle Ages. We can rest assured that it records an imaginary war and it is a creation of the fantasy of the author. Many fictitious narratives were written in the Middle Ages by some Jews. There appeared in the ninth century a man who said he was an emissary of four tribes: Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And he said that he was of the tribe of Dan, and he was called Eldad Hey Danai. He gave an account of their kingdom and of their king, who claimed to be a descendant of the ancient tribe of Dan. The Hebrew word, "Hear Israel," the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, were, were written in black on his flag, and he further related that the king had a great army in time of war. One man blew the shofar, and then 120,000 men advanced bearing white standards. Eldad also gave accounts of other tribes, also of the children of Moses. He he also wrote about the wars between these tribes and seven nations. During the battle, he said the warriors used to sing a hymn to God. Many people at that time accepted this tale as historical fact. Zemek Gaon, the leader of the Jewish people, gave credence to this story, although puzzled by accounts of practices in contradiction to the halakha of the Talmud. This hoax was believed to be historically true for many centuries. Hadassai, one of the prominent Karaites, believed that Eldad Hey Danai's account was true and of great significance. Eldad Hey Danai's account of the warfare has the same historical value as the account of the warfare in the scroll, just as prominent people once believed in the Eldad Hey Danai story, so prominent people today believe in the account of the scroll. People of all ages believe what they wish to believe. A detailed account of the warfare is given in the book called Sefer Hey Jasher, also compilation of the Middle Ages, between the sons of Jacob and the different nations who made war on them. An account of the capture of the city Goash is set forth in detail. The battle cry, according to the author, was, "O Lord, help us." A description is given of the ceremony of the 11 of Joseph to the position of vizier to Pharaoh. He rode on one of the choice horses of the king, while a parade of thousands who employed different instruments marched behind him. 5,000 men with gleaming drawn swords marched in advance. 20,000 of the nobility, girded with skins covered with gold, marched on each side of him. Some may have accepted this as historical narrative of the life of Joseph. In the same book, Sefer Hey Jasher, a description of a war is given between the Kittim and the people of Africa, after which took place in the time of Jacob. This description is based most likely on the story of the engagements between the Romans and the Hannibal and the Romans and Hannibal. Further on Further on in the book, a war is described which was waged by the Kittim, the sons of Kiddim, and the sons of Ishmael against the Egyptians. The king of the Kittim at that time was the grandson of Esau. These stories on these stories of the warfare between the Kittim and the sons of Kiddim and the Africans and Egyptians have no more historical value than the description in the scroll of the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, where the names of the nations of the Kittim and the sons of Ishmael are mentioned. The historical value of this scroll has no more vi- validity than the description on the standards given in the Targum of Jonathan, or than the account of the wars in Sefer gesture, which some scholars have also assigned great antiquity. People in the Middle Ages, including the Jews, were fond of fanciful tales. They were often relate. They were often related to. They were often related so realistically that many readers believe them to be true. As a matter of fact, some Jews still believe in this type of midrashic literature. Not only not only wars and other worldly matters were dealt with, but what goes on in the future world was described. There is a detailed description of paradise as well as of Gehinnom. There is a midrash in which a full account is given of the rewards to those in paradise and of the punishment of the wicked in Gehinnom. Gehinnom? I don't know. uh, undoubtedly, those who maintain the antiquity of the scrolls of the let's try this again. Undoubtedly, those who maintain the antiquity of the scroll will find parallel words and phrases in the scroll and ancient literature. This is to be expected. As a matter of fact, we find phrases and words, let us say, and the 18th century parallel with phrases and words in the literature of the 8th and 9th century. Some maintain that the forms of arms said to be used in combat by the Sons of Light resemble those used by the Hellenes and the Romans. Even if this were true, it is no indication that the scroll is of the Hellen or Roman period. The author may have read books or heard stories about previous wars and copied some features in them, even to appropriating as models their weapons of war. It is related in the book Sefer Jasher that when Pharaoh heard that the Israelites in Goshen were not following his decrees, he decided to go personally to annihilate them. When his chariot was passing through a narrow strip, on one side of which was a fence, and on the other side a valley, the horse of the riders who accompanied him pushed his horse into the valley. He was thrown out of the chariot into the valley and suffered many broken bones, ultimately dying in great pain as a result of his injuries. One can readily recognize that this story is patterned after the story of the death of King Antiochus IV, related in the second book of Maccabees and in Joshaphan. Jewish authors of the Middle Ages, in writing stories, made use of previous tales and embellished them by use of their own fanciful imagination. The author of the scroll belonged to this class. The number 7 plays an important part in the author's account of the wars. It was considered a holy number and was employed by authors in ancient and medieval times. Eldad Dani also employed the number 7. This is another indication that the account of the military event in the scroll is imaginary. It has been said there is internal and archaeological evidence that it was written while the temple was still standing, and held its central importance in the life of the people. There is no internal or archaeological evidence to this effect. The late Professor Sulknick bought this scroll with 2 jars from an Arab merchant who informed him that Bedouin had told him that it was in the jars. Therefore, it is crystal clear there is no archaeological evidence regarding the scroll. Neither is there any evidence that it was written while the temple was still standing. On the contrary, as we pointed out before, the author was unaware of the halakha and the customs which prevailed during the Second Commonwealth when the temple was standing. As a matter of fact, there is no reference to a temple. There can be no question that this scroll is a late composition. It is worthless for the history of the Jews during the Second Commonwealth and the history of warfare. It is an imaginary product of a Jew of the Middle Ages. The authorities of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who announced to the world the great discovery before the scroll was published, should seek to refute my arguments. They, which I don't think anyone ever does. Why I give a little bit of a I give Solomon Zeitland the benefit of the doubt, since unless I can hear people give a rebuttal to most of his arguments, I'm gonna assume there's more legitimacy to what he has to say. But anyway, we'll continue on here. Where did we leave off? After concluding the part of my essay on the scroll dealing with the so-called war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, I received the April issue of the Nouvelle Revue Théologique, I'm sure that's French or something, containing an article on the scroll by Dr. M. Delcourt, and I proposed to comment upon it. Dr. Delcourt gives a translation of the Hebrew text. The use of the word togar presented no problem to him, although the Pentateuch has the word togarma. The word togar was never used in Hebrew literature until the late Middle Ages. In translating the words, gives Hebrew here, he apparently never questioned why these words were enclosed in parentheses, a procedure not resorted to in the ancient times. At least he should have pointed this out to his readers. Again, he translated the word, I guess some Hebrew, and I think he's using another language. I'm not sure which one. So we'll go down a little bit. Dr. Delcourt also saw no problem in the fact that there's a connecting line, however, between the word, English Hebrew, and the word, another Hebrew word. The use of connecting lines was unknown among the ancient Jews. He apparently did not observe the connecting line and hence did not call it out to the attention of the readers. He translates the passage, in Hebrew, which is a quotation from the Pentateuch. And I'm not sure which language this is. He did not notice that the Pentateuch text was, and he gives Hebrew again, and then another language. I don't know it. He does that a lot. I don't know which language he's even writing in. He doesn't give a translation, so it's kind of a difficult book to kind of read out loud. It's one of those books you probably should just read yourself, but you can just listen to me try to ramble through this. While the reader, where do we know? Here we are. Dr. Delcourt renders this word, and like I said, this is hard to read. The text has dalet, I think that's the Hebrew letter, and then the line is broken and following the break is a he. Between the dalet and the he let's try this again. Between the dalet and the he, there is space for two letters. If this conjecture is correct, the text would read, I guess Hebrew, as the Lord spoke by the hand of, through Moses, copying a well-known clause of the Pentateuch. The word tohar, toar is not in the text, and if it were, it would not make any sense. And Dr. Delcourt admission, jeez. I think this is French, but I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Would not make sense in Hebrew either. If our assumption is correct that the author wrote uh, he instead of this Hebrew word. This would prove that the text of the scroll is a very late period, since the Jews in the late Middle Ages used a he for the name of this word when the author is previous passage, quote, Pentateuchal passages where the word, Hebrew word, occurs. He ignores it. The translation is not only arbitrary but faulty. In many cases, Dr. Delcourt did not fully comprehend the text. To give only a few examples, he translates the word, he gives a Hebrew word, voluntaries, which is wrong. The word, Hebrew, he translates gar. I don't even going to try to read that. He did not notice that the Hebrew text was, yeah, jeez. The word Hebrew is a repetition in meaning of another Hebrew word. The Hebrew passage, yes, Hebrew, is rendered by Dr. Delcourt as follows, and it's stating that's French. He took the words Hebrew to mean the gate, the gate where God resides, because he did not know the words should be rendered the middle gate, a phrase well known in Hebrew and Karaite literature. This is one illustration of many faulty renderings in his translation of the scroll. It is on a par with Brownlee's and DuPont Summers' rendering of the scrolls. And we got through that chapter. It went a little bit faster than I thought. It's not all that rough. Like I said, it's one of those books you really just gotta read yourself. He's a lot of words in different languages, and I'm not even gonna try to read a lot of it. So, but we'll keep going through this. There's a lot of good information and some lousy information, but it's not all that rough, because that last couple paragraphs was kind of rough. But hopefully it made enough sense.